Welcome to the 8th in a series of online interviews with Richard Harvey. My name is Rob Meager. Today's interview will discuss the lecture, Awakening the Heart Nature, the Flowering of Self-Nature and the Surrender of Compassion and Authenticity, Part 2 of 2. This lecture was originally given online on July 10th, 2013, and it is available in written form in Moksha Dawn, an ebook you can order at the Sacred Attention Therapy website at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/books. You can also listen to the full recording of many of these lectures at www.sacredattentiontherapy.com/education. And now a little bit of background about Richard Harvey. Richard is a psycho-spiritual psychotherapist and spiritual teacher. His work emerged out of the human potential movement of the 1970s. He trained with many teachers in humanistic and transpersonal approaches. He is the founder of Sacred Attention Therapy, a radical new approach to inner work for the 21st century that proposes a three-stage model of human awakening. Richard is the author of Your Essential Self and the Flight of Consciousness, among many other publications. He works with people all around the world, and his forthcoming book is entitled Your Sacred Calling. And it's now my pleasure to welcome Richard to the call.
Hi, Robert.
Hello. Good to be with you. It feels like it's been a while, even though I think it has been a fortnight. It's been a couple of weeks.
Has it been 2 weeks? Yes, of course.
But
Yeah.
it feels like much longer.
Mm.
We're here again to continue and what I intend to conclude this series of interviews about part 2 of the lecture, Awakening the Heart Nature. And I think where I'd like to enter into the discussion with you today about this lecture is to get your further insight, your further sharing on the difference between soul and spirit. And I want to start there because I think it's a nice place to start this interview, but I also want to talk about this because it comes up. If I said many times in your teachings, I might be being dramatic, but it does come up periodically. It has come up more than once in the lecture series, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe it's discussed, if not briefly, in Your Essential Self. I may be mistaken, but your take on, your teachings on the difference between the soul and the spirit is significant in as much as, once again, it's not the same as other teachings, perhaps, as mainstream concepts of soul and spirit. So could you share a little bit with the viewers what you see as the difference between soul and spirit?
The way I'll answer that, Robert, is to say that for purposes of clarity, I have felt very strongly that we should clearly demarcate between soul and spirit in a way that made sense. It's not to say that it hasn't been understood in various different ways. The soul and the spirit and the difference or the similarities. And just to drop in that, bearing in mind, 100 years ago you couldn't get hold of the Bhagavad Gita, for example, the Upanishads, for another example, ancient Chinese scriptures and other things. And when they were eventually translated, they were not available outside of academic circles for some time, and then when eventually they came to us, we were playing with what does it mean that apparently the ancient rishis spoke about the soul and spoke about this, that, and the other, and when they didn't use words of like soul and spirit at all. They were speaking in different languages, of course, and anciently. So what we wind up with from Freud to the ancient rishis is we wind up with soul and spirit being bandied around in all sorts of ways with all sorts of different meanings. My demarcation of which is which isn't without lineage. I'd say it relates to Rudolf Steiner. I'd say it relates to George Gurdjieff and others who have made a point of explaining something to do with soul and spirit. The reason I find it so important, apart from the fact we've got two terms, let's see what might be different, or how we may use them differently, is because it highlights an issue that's very close to my heart, which I know you're very familiar with, and that is the confusion about our relationship through the senses to the world and our relationship to the divine domain, the spiritual realms, outside of this world. And my principal negative criticism of, in inverted commas, spirituality today, in the popular sense, or the sense in which it's most broadly understood, is that there is a confusion between the higher human realms of sensual experience through the senses, and to some degree the lower, but in any case the further ends of participation in the divine realms, or the divine domain. The word I'd use here is experience. What happens is people begin, as I did, in spiritual exercises and practice, without having this basic thought of all my attachments. Perhaps one of the ones which will be hardest to shed is my attachment to experience of any sort. Experience of any sort. Spirituality is not an experience. Humanity is an experience. We experience through the senses. The soul in the body enables us to be here whether we believe in God, we have any trust in divine realms or any life after death, or have even heard of religion. We participate in these human realms, some of us to quite high degrees of fine, subtle, deep, profound experience. But it's not in and of itself spiritual. When it gets spiritual, it's not experiential. Therefore, the soul and the spirit reside. Here's this borderline on which experience falls on the one side, and should we say non-experience, or at least beyond experience, falls to the other side. Spirituality, participation in the divine realms can never possibly be an experience of any kind whatsoever, because there's no differentiation. There is no differentiation not only between you and I, but between subject and object, and I doing something or experiencing something else. Therefore, consciousness or God or the divine domain is beyond experience, and that's where spiritual practice per se takes us to. That's what spiritual sadhana is actually all about. It's not what soulful, experiential, relational, societal, cultural, popular spirituality is all about, of course, because we can hardly talk about this other arena. This other arena has no experience, it has no sensual quality whatsoever, and it is beyond the experience of I. Beyond the experience of I. So as soon as we start to say it, we know straight away where we are, but we're not in a place that is directly, verbally describable. Because there's no experience, which is the great challenge of speaking spiritually at all, teaching spiritually at all, writing a spiritual book. It's not easy. Anything that you say, in a sense, something behind it has to have the truth in it to make it worthwhile. shall we say? Because as soon as you utter the word I, you're very firmly in this soulful field here, where there's us and them, you and me, day and night, good and evil, and so on, in the realms of relativity, time and space. And we are absolutely shunted out of the realms of the absolute. So this is soul, and this is spirit, and this is the relationship that perhaps could say just briefly is that within the higher end of the soul experience and the soul forces is the preparation for the spiritual realms. That is to say, if you have a capacity or a destiny for the spiritual endeavor itself, then in an extreme of the experience of the soulful realms, you prepare responsibly and fully for spiritual practice, for sadhana, for lifelong discipline. And you do, that's very intelligent, because if you go in before that preparation, either you're not in, or you're just thinking about it, or you're thinking you're in, which is even worse when you're not, or you get in trouble. Hence we have an awareness these days of what's become known, I think, as spiritual emergencies and so on, but not really very different from mental disorder, basically. And we don't want to propel ourselves into there because we didn't sufficiently prepare in the soulful arena for the non-experiential participation in the divine realms. I think that's enough for now.
Well, I find that as I grow older, I look to keep things and make things simple in my life, and I can't remember specifically where you spoke about it. It may in fact be in this lecture. I don't think it is. I think it's in a previous one. But you summed it up as the soul is our feet that grounds us in this experience, and our spirit is analogous to our wings that allows us to move on to other dimensions and realms, continue on with the journey of the soul, but the spirit allows us to take flight. So this idea of the soul is our feet grounding us, our spirit is our wings that allows us to move on through our experience of life, which does not end in this dimension, that, this third dimensional reality that most of us experience.
That's right. It's poetically we stand between heaven and earth, as it were. Mm-hmm. And it means that we have a very specific, or that image gives us a very specific idea of the unique status of the human animal, so to speak. That we stand between those two, almost like a fuse, almost like a connection, but a crucial connection, shall we say, between the sacred spiritual and between the soulful human realms, in a way that no other animal, no other entity does. So it's wise to remember roots and wings, and to start with roots, of course.
Now, I want to move on with something you share in the lecture, which is, again, not the first time you talk about this in the context of the 3 stages of awakening and the importance of having a guide or a teacher along the way. And you share, and I'll just quote a few sentences from the lecture. Having released yourself from the context of fear, the chrysalis of survival, you face a threshold. This threshold is a void, and you can take nothing with you. You will never reach this threshold without a guide, a mentor, a teacher. Don't think you can. It does not work. It is a part of the present human paradox that the ones who transcend conditioning may be available and able to help the ones who are ready to let go and reach the threshold. You've spoken about this, that is, the importance of the teacher and the guide in the process. And I wanted to ask you, and I've asked it in different ways before, but what would you say to those who think they can reach the threshold alone?
First, there are clearly people who can reach the threshold alone. There are people for whom the threshold is irrelevant. But it is such a tiny number, it's such a small amount of people, whereas well to let it go at that and just to generalize, because of course any of this talking about these matters is generalizing to some degree, is to generalize and just say nobody. I mean, we can follow the, I don't know if it was in the Upanishads or where it was exactly now, but wherever it was where it says 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000 can do it on their own, can make it alone, can reach Brahma, without a guru, this kind of idea. But, it's really just a flowery way of saying you better get a teacher, you better get someone to help you, as with all other things. As with all other things, even in the mundane world, and we can always use the mundane world, we should, to shed light on these things. And I left home and I didn't cook anything, I didn't know how to, and one day somebody showed me frying an egg, and that was great, I didn't know, and I couldn't get it from a book, and I couldn't get it anyway, I saw somebody doing it, that was great. So now I could make something to eat. And these are wonderful things through your life. I mean, look back and consider you learn some stuff from books, of course, and you learn some things in school, possibly. But in the end, isn't it those people who inspire you and you attend to, and they have a certain presence, and then you're just entranced by the way they move their hands or their bodies, and you learn something that stays with you forever, because it's a whole bodily, emotional, physical, energetical transmission, whether it's egg frying or spiritual teaching. So the teacher is, I think we just have to say objectively, mandatory.
Along this road, though, even with the guide and with the teacher, you get to the point where what you're learning, you want to share, you want to spread the word. But there's a cautionary note, sort of, that you share later in the lecture. It's this idea of spreading enlightened teachings at our peril. And I'll just read the paragraph where this appears. My therapy and teaching practice lends itself to challenge, and there is a psychic rule, an inner law I have become increasingly aware of. Spread enlightened teachings at your peril. Everything you say must be proved in you. Up to a point, this was never a problem for me. I remember a man looking into my soul once, and among many other true things he said was, "You never ask anyone to do what you yourself are not willing to do or have not already experienced." I knew this was absolutely so. Tell me more about this spreading enlightened teachings at your peril. What's the perilousness in it?
Can I just preface it by saying something, because as soon as I'd finished answering the last question, and it leads on into this one, I wanted to say one more thing about it. It's absolutely to do with this, which is that, see, the outside world is a reflection of the inner world, or really better put, in terms of psychology, the outside world is the unfinished business of the inner world. It's the same as in the Course in Miracles. The world you see isn't the real world. So what is it that you see? Well, it turns out what you see is yourself. So, and what part of yourself? The part you admit to, and no, the other one. So this is what we're getting. This is what we're seeing. And one of the immense importance of the teacher, but not only the teacher, but your acknowledgement of the teacher in the outside world is, he is, and I've said this before, after Ramakrishna, I think, the teacher is a whole, H-O-L-E. The teacher is a whole, because you have this kind of veil, or projective screen, shall we say, and you see all this activity and dynamics and the emotions and everything else being played out in front of you, and you say, well, that's the world, and it's not, it's in here. Now, if this man or woman, apparently, in appearance, manifests there, they're not in that drama anymore. And because they're not in that drama, and because you acknowledge somebody has now appeared in the world who's not in your drama, you're beginning to release yourself from the attachments to this delusion of the outside world as not being yourself, because you haven't done your unfinished business here. So hence the further importance that the being who appears, who represents for you the divine, is there as a whole, or in a different dimension, you might say, to everything else that's going on. It saves you, really. Because there's only one thing that is real then in the world before you, but at least there's one thing. Now, if you run with that, the rest of it's going to get polluted by realness, and you're going to clear out. The perils of spiritual teaching are, of course, number one, the thing that we just said is, if you go around saying these things or teaching these things or expecting these things of other people, you better have addressed it in yourself, otherwise it will kind of boomerang back and smack you in the face. It's just how it is. This is some kind of natural psycho-spiritual law. It just does that. And I could bring up examples. I mean, people can look for themselves. There are examples of spiritual teachers, both in tradition from centuries ago, but also in the modern era, where if you stand up for long enough, enunciating this kind of stuff, and it isn't really grounded inside you, you are going to get into some kind of trouble. It's going to get you.
I call it divine whiplash.
Whiplash, yes. So, and the peril is that sometimes you can't necessarily withstand it, shall we say. It may be so. It may be so abrasive, or really frictional. Can we say frictional? In the sense that whatever's remained of your egoistic existence rubs up against it so harshly, and you really can't bear it. It just hurts too much. It's too painful. I mean, it itself isn't painful, but whatever it is you're holding on to is making it painful. And that can be devastating. It can be devastating. It's a sort of precursor of being burned in the spiritual fire if you have avoided preparation fully in some kind of a way. Spirituality, of course, isn't in of itself anything other than completely natural and the fulfillment of your humanness, if you will. But insofar as you hold on to separative identity, you experience it as very sharp as very painful, really, as very painful.
I remember smiling the first time I heard that passage. The point being is everything you say must be proved in you. Continuing on with the quote, up to the point this was never a problem for me. I remember a man looking into my soul once, and among many of the true things he said was, you never ask anyone to do what you yourself are not willing to do. And I can remember years earlier in my corporate Canada career, when I would be interviewing someone to join the team, I would always emphasize two things to them. I said, number one, you're not going to be working for me, you're going to be working with me. And number two, I will never ask you to do anything I couldn't or wouldn't do myself. And so when I read this, I remember hearing it the first time, and I just smiled. You go on shortly after this, Richard, to share what I think we all know as a truth, but about spiritual development, about realizing our full potential. But when you put it the way you put it, it makes it, and I'll share it with you in a minute. It makes me at least sit back and ponder what the implications of this is. And let me read the passage. The second stage awakening experience is also a preparation for the further realms of spiritual and self-realization. Please remember this: the true potential of the single human being is not merely great, amazing, or more than you can imagine. The potential of the single human being is limitless. It does not have an end. Not even the great beings, the divine adepts, the full realizers of human history so far have come close to this limitlessness. The planet is about 4 or 5 billion years old. Homo sapiens have been around about 100,000 years. And we have been self-reflecting for a mere few thousand years of this time period. It is by no means over, and we have evolved nowhere near the full extent of our realized spiritual being. No one has. What are we to take from this? What are we to take from this perspective that no one has evolved anywhere near the full extent of our realized spiritual being?
Well, I think if you accept what I said there, then it involves some humility, does it not? But it also involves some surrender and acceptance. I mean, ultimately we are, and I'm speaking in that part of the discourse from a relative perspective, ultimately we are, like a tree, or like a flower, or like a sand grain. We're in a period of, in the outer world anyway, we're in a period of evolution, and we can do as much as we can do as human beings. We can do more probably than many other human beings if we think about our spiritual nature, but in the end we can only grow to a certain potential that we have inherent in us and in our own personal destiny, but in relationship to everybody else. Or rather, everybody else isn't separate from us anyway. So this, it seems to me, is one of the ultimate statements you could make about spirituality in relationship to the relative world. If you're going to make a statement about the spiritual or the divine in relation to the experiential realms, this is about as far as you can go. It's absurd to think in terms of that somehow this extraordinary event, the human being walking on the earth, is somehow, we happen to be born at a time when this is as far as we go. I mean, look at our relationship to Neanderthal man and before and proto, whatever they're called, all these different labels we have on early Homo sapiens. It's extraordinary, what we're doing now in relationship to that. What are we going to be doing in 10, 50, 100, 1,000 years? What's it going to look like? The world's already looking to me, and I'm 63 this year, and the world has changed so much since I was first introduced to it. It is in many ways fairly unrecognizable.
Yeah.
You took an adult from my childhood and plonk them down in the situation that we have here, you haven't got a clue what to do. Everything's changed enormously in all sorts of ways. Miracles abound. So who knows in 100,000 years? But what we're interested in, or what I'd like to focus on anyway, is spirituality. And I think that all I can intuit or foresee about this is we move further into the body of light. I think that must be in some ways an eventuality, that consciousness appears in the physical plane as light. And we ourselves are light. Everything ultimately is light. And so the way that it appears to me is that in thousands of years as we roll on, we move increasingly, we evolve into literal beings of light, into light beings, as a physical reality. Mm-hmm. And that itself is representative or is the manifestation of unity consciousness in the realms of time and space.
Sorry, were you going to go
no,
on?
Go ahead.
You actually speak of that in the lecture, and I won't get into that part of the lecture specifically, but we'll share a related passage and ask you to speak more about this wonderful transcendent experience of a stream you used to visit as a young boy. And I don't know if you remember this piece in the lecture, and I trust you certainly remember this stream and these experiences as a young boy. And in this passage, you go on to share some wisdom about unity and oneness. And I'll share the passage again. The lead up to this is there was a place as a young boy you used to visit. There was a stream, and even the land surrounding this stream caught your excitement, caught your awe. And you described the water in this stream as follows. Every single droplet of water that is separated from the stream contains a sphere of the totality. The whole world exists within the spherical shape of the water drop as it takes in and reflects the total context of itself. Even separated, it is not divided from anything else. All things are woven together in an endless tapestry of narrative and unfolding. All things are one in essence. All is consciousness, God, and unity. And in this transcendent insight lies our liberation and our freedom. All things are connected. All things are one. Finally, then, in devotion and gratitude, nothing is left to do, to achieve, to accomplish, to become. When you are as you are, simply being in the one. How did this awareness as a young boy impact your life?
Well, I think that just autobiographically, I was happier on my own. I was happier in nature. I was happier solo. I didn't. I, like many people I've met over the last few decades, was strange. Really, I didn't like things that other kids liked. I didn't participate in things. I didn't like sports, for example. Remotely. Didn't like physical exercise very much. I was more inclined towards stillness. I realized later that I didn't understand at the time, because it's so ephemeral, that I was very responsive to atmosphere. And that became clearer and clearer to me in the adolescence and my 20s. Atmosphere, and not only interpersonal atmosphere, emotional atmosphere, and these obvious kinds of atmospheres that were not easy for me at all, but also atmosphere as it's changing if we sit in stillness. There's a lot going on when you're quiet, you might say. And I experienced it as atmospheres and a great sensitivity to atmosphere. So, I was like anybody else who's spiritual and perhaps doesn't wake up into a family that have any idea about what that could possibly mean. And I used to have all of the obvious fantasies, the usual fantasies of being, in the wrong body or in the wrong place in this body, or just it's all a huge mistake, and what can I possibly be doing here? I mean, I had very, very vivid experiences of the idea of some kind of spaceship coming to take me away and things like that when I was quite young. That it would come onto the roof and I'd be winched up or something, and the idea of beings come to you and say, oh, actually it was all a huge mistake, you belong in this other world, or something like this. But it was a reflection of the other world that I was in that was real for me. And that other real that was real for me was the undifferentiated consciousness of the divine domain. I mean, it was true to me, it was real. And there was no place in which that was recognized, but even insinuated itself in any way onto the outside. I didn't realize at the time that was simply true. That's simply the truth. That is how it is. But it didn't make life very easy, so to speak. It didn't make life easy at all. But hey, it's the price you pay, isn't
it? It's also the blessing that you receive.
The suffering is the blessing, yeah. Yeah.
Near the very end, if not right at the end, there's this beautiful passage. When we die, the light goes out. The spirit that inhabits the body, the physical form, leaves. Will we have lived here without at least having realized our humanity? The transition from chrysalis to flight, from fear to love, from death in life to life in life, from numbness to passion. And I think where I want to leave today's interview and this series of talks about this lecture is, do we all in the end, quote, realize our humanity?
I don't think so. I think we know there's a feeling for many people, there may be a feeling of relative closure or relative ending in some way, but I think that as far as I can tell, looking across the board, people have regrets, they have aspirations that didn't fulfill, a certain amount of dissatisfaction, and this of course is how it should be, because without a life spent in the heart and with a spiritual attainment, there is no fulfillment or satisfaction. It's not a partial thing. Human being is as magnificent as that, as to say that unless you entirely inhabit your heart, unless you bloom and blossom in the way that is the natural course of allowing yourself to become, you remain unhappy, unjoyful, unfulfilled in some kind of a way. And in this way that we're relating, or you quite rightly related blessing to suffering, this is the natural state, this is how it is. So each one of those souls who leaves the world unfulfilled is after all teaching or reminding or helping us to remember, give us some impetus to go the whole way into spiritual fulfillment.
Mm-hmm. Hmm. 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 It is how we see it.
Hmm.
We've come to the end of this lecture, Awakening the Heart Nature, and there is one more lecture in this series, the Silent Thunder Discourses, that we will be enjoying, but we will be taking a little break, brief, for the listeners and the viewers. And Richard, could you share with those watching what this little break is going to be about?
Yeah, I'm pruning down my duties and responsibilities and the schedule and the routine and so on somewhat over the next 8 weeks. Our next scheduled interview of this series will be in June, therefore, the 17th, I think. Mm-hmm. And the reason is I've had my book, Your Sacred Calling, which is the second in the trilogy. It began with Your Essential Self, the current book. Your Sacred Calling is the middle. The final one will be Your Divine Being. And Your Sacred Calling has taken, as all my books seem to, years to write. It's been around with me now for 2 or 3, I think, so it's relatively young. But I've returned to it again with a feeling of finishing now, and it's wonderful to return to it because I'm very excited by the book. Just very briefly, in a sentence perhaps, the book is about our human custodianship of the sacred spiritual ways and means to realization. And it's a plea really to us, to humanity, to find a place for authentic spirituality, ceremony, ritual, relevant to this modern era, and to not let our consciousness of our divine nature atrophy and perhaps be occluded altogether in time. So it seems to me an important book, an important message, shall we say. Mm-hmm. We hope Llewellyn Worldwide will take it up, and we hope that I will get the book proposal, which are awful things, where you tell them what the book's about, and you do this in a mere sort of 8 pages, but you try and tell them what a good book it is and how many copies you're going to sell, you know, and all this kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to finish the book.
Very good. Well, blessings and Godspeed with your sabbatical.
Thank you.
And we'll come together again, as you mentioned, it's end of June to continue on.
Yeah.
Good.
I look forward to it.
Bye-bye.